We already had 2 healthy children, 6 years and 2 years, and decided it was time to add a new addition. After having pretty good pregnancies with my last 2, I knew what to expect, so when my waters broke 2 a.m. Sunday, a day before my due date, we were all pretty excited. Only my labour didn't start, and I ended up being induced on the Monday. After a difficult and tiring labour, our baby boy finally made his entrance at 11:18 p.m. I was elated and he was perfect. Only over the course of that night, Ben was running a high temperature, and the doctor in the morning explained he had an infection and needed intravenous antibiotics for a full 5 days. That night, after being admitted to a ward for poorly babies, I couldn't get to sleep. I tossed and turned and felt too hyper to relax enough to drift off. When family and friends came to visit, I kept feeling a horrible dread that my baby was seriously poorly and wasn't going to get better. Everyone kept reassuring me he was going to be fine, but I had this horrible voice in my head telling me he was going to die. Hindsight and looking back to that time, I can see myself that I was acting totally out of character, but strange things continued to happen. I became so distressed one night, complaining of earache, that the midwife in charge decided to take me down to A&E, where they looked in my ears and explained nothing seemed wrong. I kept telling the midwife that I felt a strange sensation through my chest that worked its way to my head and made me feel like crawling on the floor. A specialist ear doctor came to see me and did multiple tests that confirmed that my ears were fine. By this point, we'd been in hospital for 4 days and I still hadn't slept. That night I was sat in my room watching the baby when I had a sudden thought that bugs were crawling over my skin, so I went and showered, then again, until a nurse asked if everything was all right. I explained about the bug feeling and she told me it was probably exhaustion and to try and rest. Yet again I couldn't sleep. Finally, on the 6th day, we were allowed home. After being home that night and again not being able to sleep, my husband took me to the doctor's, where I came out with, "I believe I have chickenpox." The doctor was slightly baffled and explained the sheer exhaustion and the stress was contributing to my strange behaviour and sent me home with sleeping tablets. That day, I was aimlessly walking around the house with a blank expression and muttering to myself. My husband didn't have a clue what was wrong with me, and that's when things got really bad. I started talking to my husband about my brother and father abusing me as a child. He was completely gobsmacked because I'd never said such things before them. And that evening I went to my parents' house to confront my father, but he was in work. So I spoke to my mother and sister about my brother, both equally as shocked as my husband. As they tell me now, I seemed very confused and disorientated, and a little while later started flipping out that my brother was the father of my baby. My mother quickly rang my father, who rushed home, and I then hurled abuse at him and started blaming him for hurting me as a child and trying to control me with his code words. Everyone was completely confused, but by this point they'd all come to the same conclusion. I had completely gone insane. My sister went to my house to mind the children, while my husband took me to our local A&E department, but on the way I started screaming at my husband to take me home, because my sister was going to kill my children because my dad had control over her with his code words. My husband tried to calm me and reassured me that she would never harm our children, but I was utterly convinced. After arriving at the hospital, I was seen by a psychiatrist who asked a few questions and delivered my husband with the information that I was suffering with postpartum psychosis. My husband then had to take me to a psychiatric hospital so I could receive treatment. As they explained, it would get worse before it got better. During the car journey to the hospital, I started telling my husband that my father was setting us up, putting things in our home and on our internet to frame us as paedophiles. By this point, I was starting to believe that I myself had harmed our children, and that my husband was doing it too. I was then admitted to the assessment unit, and to be honest, I don't remember a lot from that point onwards. Family explained that I was a completely different person, and just mumbled to myself and very paranoid and untrusting of everyone. I was put on medication called risperidone to counteract the delusions and the hallucinations. I also had 6 treatments of electroconvulsive therapy to help with the major depression I was suffering, along with antidepressants. I was in hospital for 16 days, and I was released with support from the crisis team and perinatal team, who would come to the house and see how I was doing and help support the family. 2 months after being sent home, I had a bad bout of depression and attempted suicide and was readmitted for 4 days. But slowly, with support and medication, I've come a very long way from where I was, and I'm more myself every day. My baby's 11 months old now, and I'm having a lot more good days compared to bad. I can now look back and say with complete certainty that everything I said was due to the illness. The great thing is postpartum psychosis is 100% recoverable, and that's normally around the 18-month mark. With support from family and friends, you will get better, and you'll slowly come to terms with what happened. It's a very big shock to the system, but stay positive and you will get the old you back.